I thought this was a democratic country, and I was so proud of it until I just heard what happened in there.
Tuesday, July 30th, Robert Krajcik reporting for Rebel News here in Lethbridge, Alberta. At the conclusion of today's proceedings in the trial of Chris Carbert and Anthony Olenek. Chris Carbert and Anthony Olenek are both accused of conspiring to murder police officers at the 2022 Coutts protest and blockade. The charge of conspiracy to murder carries with it a maximum penalty, if convicted, of life imprisonment. They're also charged with unlawful possession of a firearm for a dangerous purpose, and also mischief over $5,000. Anthony Olenek is additionally charged with unlawful possession of an explosive device for a dangerous purpose. The two men have pled not guilty to all the charges against them. Much like its sister protest, the Freedom Convoy in Ottawa, the Coutts demonstration and blockade of 2022 was a peaceful and civilly disobedient demonstration in broad opposition to this governmental apparatus of surveillance and control and censorship, edicts, orders, mandates, all marketed to us as public health measures to reduce COVID-19 transmission. The entire day was dedicated to closing arguments from all parties. Catherine Bayak representing Chris Carbert, Marilyn Burns representing Anthony Olenek, and Matt Debilowitz, who is one of three prosecutors representing the Crown. Rebel News had journalists on location at the 2022 Coutts protest and blockade producing unparalleled journalism. Hopefully I can carry the torch and follow in their footsteps and continue that tradition here in Lethbridge years later as we report on trials that unfold from prosecutions that came from that demonstration. And remember, folks, unlike our so-called mainstream news media competitors, we're not getting handouts from the federal government to toe that government line. So help us out, contribute, help us continue this journalistic enterprise by visiting truckertrial.com and also stay up to date with our ongoing coverage. Marilyn Burns, defense counsel for Anthony Olenek, was the first to offer closing remarks to the jury. She opened up by criticizing the RCMP. She said the RCMP engaged in a, quote, disastrous police investigation. She also said the RCMP, quote, fell short of its job. As an example of this RCMP failure, as she put it, given the federal law enforcement agency's ostensible investigation of criminality at the 2022 Coutts protest and blockade, she noted that the RCMP confused two individuals who shared the same first name, Corey Turcotte and Corey Toon, both of whom have testified in this trial, by the way. Marilyn Burns also said that the Crown's theory of this alleged gun exchange that took place at Coutts was implausible. And we've seen evidence from witnesses who partook in that transfer, who testified under oath that the items being exchanged were not firearms, but were actually clothing items, such as socks and underwear. At the time of the 2022 Coutts protest and blockade, Marilyn Burns said that her client, Anthony Olenek, and Chris Carbert, quote, were little more than acquaintances. We've heard testimony from Chris Carbert that he first met Anthony Olenek in the weeks leading up to the protest. Another quote from Marilyn Burns, I cannot find a hint of evidence of any agreement to murder police officers between two or more people. In order to secure a conviction in any charge of conspiracy to commit any crime, the Crown must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the alleged co-conspirators undertook, engaged in, or executed behaviors and actions in furtherance of the alleged conspiracy. I'll use a simple example to illustrate actions or behaviors that would constitute furtherance of a conspiracy. In this case, conspiracy to rob a business establishment. Imagine two co-conspirators conspire to rob a business establishment. The Crown would prove in this case, hypothetically, that one or both of them were casing the joint, examining the business to see when the owner opens and closes, that the other co-conspirator was obtaining a vehicle that could be used to steal merchandise. The Crown must prove that behaviors and actions were executed in furtherance of that conspiracy. Marilyn Burns also said, in anticipation of what she described as an impracticable theory from the Crown, that there was no reasonable argument to be made that her client, Anthony Olenek, conspired to murder police officers in the context of this 2022 Coutts protest and blockade. She said such an endeavor would amount to a suicide mission, given how many police officers were deployed to the protest, how heavily armed they were, and that her client had a hunting rifle and shotgun with him nearby. Marilyn Burns also said that if her client, Anthony Olenek, had any plot or plan, it was to persuade police officers to join him in protest. She recalled some statements that he had made during his interview with an RCMP officer shortly after his arrest, in which he described as the trucker movement as, quote, all about freedom and God. He also said that he wished to, quote, stand with God and stand with love, and that his end goal, when he was asked what that was by an RCMP interviewing officer, was to homestead, to live with his animals, and to pray to God. She shared these comments as indicative or reflective of character that is incompatible with the type of man that would engage in conspiracy to murder police officers. Catherine Bayak, who is representing Chris Carbert, opted against opposing the charge of mischief over $5,000. She said, quote, to the jurors, I'm going to invite you to find Chris guilty on the charge of mischief. She stated that his testimony acknowledged that he had, quote, actively participated in the blockade at Coutts, and she emphasized again, quote, I'm going to suggest that he is guilty of the mischief count. Bayak also told jurors that, quote, there was no conspiracy at all to murder police officers at Coutts. She added that if jurors determined that there was, in fact, a conspiracy to murder police officers, that her client, Chris Carbert, was not a part of it. I'm here with Hervinder. Hervinder, is it fair to describe you as a concerned citizen?
Very much so. Very much so. I have lived in Africa. I was born there, and I was a refugee from Uganda, and I came here to Canada in 1975, and I've lived here since then. And I thought this was a democratic country, and I was so proud of it until I just heard what happened in there. With this trial, what I've heard, it is, I got butterflies in my stomach from all of this, because it's just not democracy what I have seen in there. It's like a circus of clowns trying to pin evidence on innocent people.
So you told me before, you've attended several days proceedings, that you're traveling from Calgary. Yeah. Obviously, you've got this interest in being here. What do you think is at stake? What's your motivation for attending these proceedings?
Well, I want this country to be safe for my children and their children and everybody else's children, your children. This is not democracy, what's happening out there. Nobody's talking about it. Nobody knows about it. People are just shut down because there is so much information and misinformation being put out there. I wanted to come here to find out what the truth was, and to tell you the truth, the truth hurts, because what's going on in there is not what our laws are about. This is not what our country is about. This is not what democracy is about.
Do you find this to be a political persecution rather than a criminal prosecution?
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is criminals that are running our country are now prosecuting innocent people just because they want to hide their own crimes.
So Chris Carbert and Anthony Olenek are being targeted because they've got the wrong points of view and spoke out about it?
Absolutely. Who doesn't prep? I prep. I've been prepping for the last 5 years. I've got about 300 cans of stuff that I can, and I'm still canning. Do I own guns? Yes. My 5-year-old had 22 rifles. 5-year-old when she was 5. She was the Alberta champion for shooting when she was 12 years old. We had so much ammunition in the house. I don't know what came up with all these numbers, but we went skeet shooting. We went target practicing with the girls. I have 3 daughters. They're now in their, 40, 39, and 35. But these girls grew up around guns. I grew up around guns. My mother grew up around guns.
Just to add some context to what Hervinder is saying, ownership of firearms and also prepping has been sort of framed by the prosecution as evidence of criminal conspiracy towards murder, and also critiques of the government and fears of increasingly abusive government tyranny. So if a person has those points of view, do you have those points of view? Are you afraid that the government will become increasingly tyrannical?
Well, we already know that they are. Look what the horses with little old women on walkers in Ottawa. What were they doing? We are protesting for our rights, which is a legal right to protest. It is a legal democratic right to protest. And yet that is being taken away from us.
Now, as far as today's proceedings, anything particular jumped out at you with respect to closing arguments that you heard from either defense attorney or Matt Debilowicz, part of the Crown's prosecution team?
I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about it, but what I found is that the Crown has a lot of words, but no meaning behind them. They don't have evidence to prove what they are saying. It seems to me, and this is my opinion, that they are fabricating as they go along.
Well, you're allowed to say that anything that took place in the presence of the jury is fair game, so it's all open.
Well, what I found is that when the Crown is presenting their case, they haven't even presented it to to Chris or Tony, what they presented to the jury today. And that in itself is criminal. You cannot prosecute somebody and not give them the chance for rebuttal.
Rebel News had reporters embedded on location at the 2022 Coutts protest and blockade, producing unparalleled journalism. Hopefully, I'm still able to carry that torch forward into today, 2024, where we're reporting on trials flowing from prosecutions that came from that demonstration. There's no other news media outlet that can claim that deep connection to these events as they unfold. And unlike our so-called mainstream news media competitors, we're not getting handouts from the federal government to toe that official line. We depend on our beautiful audience to donate and contribute to our operational costs. So please do so. Visit truckertrial.com so we can keep this journalistic enterprise going and stay up to date with our ongoing coverage.